Cool. So let's get rolling then. I'm recording too. So I'm Lee Foss. Most of you probably know that if you're here for the Repopulate workshop. Um, we have been running some free courses like this just to give you guys like a basic feel of not just, how we run the actual workshop, but just to give some cool techniques so that you can get track started, maybe even if you can't afford online education. This is a good opportunity for you to get a little bit of a feel for so a few different cool production techniques. So today we've got West End, Detlef, Deeper Purpose, Joshua, Lee Curtis. They're all excellent at different things. They're some of the biggest artists on Beatport, some of the best DJs around. So I know that Joshua was gonna jump into percussion today. So I think that that's a really important place to start when you're working and learning how to produce, is building out a basic groove, building out your grooves, bass and percussion kicks. Like that rock solid groove is really how you're going to start rooting the rest of your song. Whether you add vocals, melodies, chords, the cadences, that anything else that you play is going to be off if you start with those things and they're completely quantized. You really want to write around a good groove. So I know Josh, ordinarily I wouldn't start out with the newbie, but I do think that that's the best place to start generally, is from a groove. So why don't you take us through how you get into percussion, because you've got current number one, I don't know who you made it with, but you've got the current number one song on Beatport, one of the biggest smashes we've had, and we've had some big ones. We've had a few number ones, including Detlef's had a number one on Beatport with Swag on, but some great percussion on that track and a great percussion on a lot of your songs. So why don't you jump in and give us a feel for how you do that and how you make your groove.
Yeah, cool. So should all be able to see my screen now. Let me know if you can't. And if I leave it,
yeah, the audio is coming through.
Okay.
Yeah, the audio is coming.
I had it.
You might want to put on headphones if possible, if you have them.
I do, yeah, but it might mess up the audio settings. That's the only issue. But yeah, so effectively, there's I think, as Lee said, like the groove and the drums of the track and like that basic groove is one of the most fundamental pieces of dance music and house music, and has been for ever since the kind of origins of it. And I think it really sets the tone if you have a really solid groove and a really, belting undertone to your track that you can kind of build around. And I feel that like it's one of the first places I go to, even if I have an inspiration for like a sample or something like that. I will always start with the drums, and I'll start with a kick to begin with. And then basically from the kick, I'll then build out my hats and claps. So as you can see here, I've got like a layered group of hats and claps. And obviously a kick drum, which I've kind of put in there as sort of a bass, which sounds like this. That's sort of like the basic sort of groove that I've gone for, just with this sort of template file to begin with. And basically this is split out into a number of different layers. Obviously everybody does things differently, right? So I'm sure, Lee, West End, Deep Purpose, Detlef, everyone on the call have been working for me. And I think the easiest way to kind of explain how I do it is just sort of like walk you through the different sort of layers that I've done here for this initial groove, and then I'll go on to building some percussion into that. So basically, first of all, obviously laid down the kick drum here, which you can see, which is a sample from a sample pack, which sounds like this. And all I've done here is basically added in a utility to mono that kick. So basically when you drag that in and drop it, you then get the option to mono that, and by doing that, that keeps the kick at the center of the track.
You mono the entire frequency range, or just below a certain level? Typically?
For the kick, I do the whole frequency. If it was the bass, I'd probably just do under 100 hertz, I think. Obviously, people may disagree or agree with that, but I like the kick to be kind of the central focus of the track and be the real driving sort of factor there. So then basically once I've got the kick in there, what I'll then do is add my first hi-hat. So essentially I'd then basically drag and drop a hi-hat in there. So as you can see here, we've got one from the sample pack here. Basically, obviously draw the notes in. What I like to do right from the get-go is make these notes really small. So basically when you're drawing the hi-hat in, instead of having them long when you initially draw them in, I like to keep them nice and short and snappy. The reason I do this is because it enables you to go into the original sort of, I guess, what's it called? Sampler here. And basically you can mess with the release function there. So that basically allows you to keep the sample tight or long, basically, depending on what you do. And I do that with all my hats and all my claps as well.
And in fact, we're going to show you some techniques, guys. Even if it's loops, there's ways to shorten up the transients. There's all kinds of techniques, because I think that can really change up the feel or groove. You can do this with loops as well as, you know, techniques like you're seeing now, you know, just drawing it. And that's a really good way to kind of change up the feel of a sample. Maybe, you know, like a long release or decay on a hi-hat might make it kind of slow down or muddy up your groove compared to like tighter hats, as Josh is saying.
Yeah, it's the same with claps as well, right? So with this clap here, as you can see, I've basically, as you can see down here, the release is set to really short. Basically, this is just enabled to keep that really tight, and like tighter, and I feel that kind of like really helps the driving grooves that some of my tracks sort of have. But I guess, yeah, once I've sort of developed the hats and claps and built that, I then sort of look to add in percussion, and I do this in a variety of different ways. So I think usually what I'd start with here is I'd start with like a snare or something. So how I do this is I'd create a MIDI track, rename it snare. Then basically what I like to do is just search all my samples. I find this is the quickest way. So I type in snare at the top and click all results. As you kind of work, you'll build up loads of different samples and loops. And then you can basically go through and pick the ones that work or sound up. So for example, we could add that one in. And then it's just a case of I drag and drop it essentially into here. And that allows me to then basically draw in a MIDI clip and add in the sort of different and again, I'd keep these nice and short as well, so then you can control the release. A little tip when you're drawing these in as well is if you hold down Command, it allows you to do it sort of freehand, whereas without it, it would just snap to the different lines there. What I like to do as well is, whilst I'm working right from the beginning, I'll select a groove and add this into my groove pool. I'll go into this in more detail sort of later on in the course, but I feel like, I mean, some people add groove manually, but I feel that having that groove there automatically really helps sort of the track come to life, if that makes sense.
Well, doing it manually, it's harder to get a universal groove across elements, whereas you can apply that swing, you know, even to your bass line and across the board if you want.
Yeah, and I find by doing it across the board, it sort of helps glue everything together a bit more.
It's also really cool because you can have a loop that's like percussion that's played by somebody else, you know, and you're using the loop and it's got a certain groove. You can extract that groove into your groove pool and apply it to your hats, and it starts making everything gel together with the same sort of movement. So super useful. It's a genius addition to Ableton.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess obviously from here I'd go out and build it in different ways. So sometimes I'd go in and add sort of different like percussion elements. So it could be like bongos, congos, whatever you sort of want to add in. A cool little trick that I often do in my tracks is, so if I'm looking for percussion, I'll just type in percussion. As you can see here, I've got loads of different sort of percussion elements. So let's just take this one as an example. What I'd then do is drag that onto an audio track, to reduce the volume a bit so it's not too overpowering. Then what I like to do is basically link this up with my other percussions. So I'd select the groove, and then a cool little trick is if you select beats here, and select that little arrow at the top, and then bring this sort of parameter down. Basically what that will do is just pick out the spiky elements of the loop. And what this means is that the loop that you're dragging in that every man and his dog's using will sound really different to what they're using. So essentially, it sounds with all the transients pulled down, or normally it sounds like this. You can see it kind of really just takes the snappier elements. So what I tend to do is drag that in, add that with the groove, and then whilst doing that, I'll add different effects, for example, like chorus, just to basically give it some wacky sort of feel, so that it doesn't sound like a standard loop, if that makes sense. But so I'll go in and add that. Got that groove setting and swing approved already. And then, yeah, basically add a few of those, add in some bongos, congos, variety of different elements, and just sort of like really build it out from there. But yeah, I'll obviously go into a lot more detail on the actual individual courses, but that sort of gives you a little bit of a flavor in terms of how I start my grooves and build them out.
Nice. Yeah, no, that was very, very enlightening. Yeah, you got a good sound, and I think people, they need to start from seeing that it's not, it's not as hard as it seems to get these great, great grooves. It just takes, a little ingenuity and things that make it your own, and just a few simple techniques, and you can have a really rock solid groove. And that's really how you have to start a song.
Yeah.
Weston, do you want to go second?
All right, let me just unmute myself. Yeah, I'll go right now. Let me just show my screen.
So Tyler had a big year as well. He's got another big hit going right now. He also had another one of the year's biggest hits on Repopulate. I should say Joshua had two of the year's biggest hits on Repopulate. And Tyler's had several huge records this year, including I'm Coming Out, and obviously Jumpin' with Sid, who maybe if we're lucky, we'll get them together for a collab class. We'll see.
Yeah, he's not that busy.
Weston
he can hop
is
on.
going to be there as much as he can this year. I know he's not going to be able to do all 8 weeks, but he's going to enlighten us with some great information. Were you doing vocal processing? Was that?
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit more about more of like a mixing thing, but just vocal processing. So I have here one of the songs I put out this fall. It's called Life of Sin. It came out on Insomniac Records. And I was just going to show you guys how vocal processing, and what I mean by that is different effects that you can put on vocals to make them sound different, can really make a vocal sound totally different and kind of fit in your track more. So let me just do a quick test to see if the audio is coming through. I'm just going to like solo the drums. Is that coming through?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So here's the project file. This is like the finished project. So you're guys looking at right now. And basically this was like a song. It was an instrumental idea I wrote, and I sent it out to a vocalist friend. He's also a producer, and he was on the label. His name's Ranger Trucco. I think he did something with Moose Lee, right? Yeah, he was like on one of the EPs.
Yeah,
but
they had Dale was the other side.
Yeah. But yeah, so like let me just play for you guys what the song sounds like. I'll play like maybe 30 seconds, and then I'll show you guys what's going on with the effects on the vocal.
All I need in this life is sin, is a club addiction and a good best friend. Can we take these shots? I won't do them alone. Can we go all night till the lights come on? Till the lights come on. 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 In this life is sin.
All right, cool. So that's what the track sounds like. This is kind of like the build-up section. And I want to show you guys what the vocals sound like without any of the effects. So I have this other channel here, which is the same thing. And I basically just turned off all these effects. So this is kind of like what the vocal sounded like when I got the recording from Ranger. Oh, let me play this again.
All I need in in this life is sin.
So kind of,
Love addiction. Best friend. Can we take these shots?
so they definitely sound a bit different. And I kind of wanted to walk through some of the steps that I take to get a vocal to really fit your track, because a lot of times you guys, you're maybe looking for a vocal for your track. You get one from Splice, you get one from an acapella, you record your own vocal. And a lot of times, like, the lyrics may be great, the melody may be great, the rhythm, but the way that it works with all the other elements in your track, the mix of it isn't great. So I wanted to kind of go through some of the steps I'm doing. So let's start with the processed vocal, or actually let's start with the not processed one. And I'm gonna kind of turn on these effects one by one. So let's go back here. And let's turn this on. Let's just turn this all off. And I know you guys may not have all these plugins. A lot of them can be done with Ableton as well. So I'll kind of explain what the Ableton version would be. So the first effect we have is an EQ.
All I need in this life is sin.
So what it's really doing
Club
is
addiction.
it's taking out a lot of the lows. You can hear the way he recorded the vocal. There's a lot of bass in it. If you have headphones, you may not be able to hear it, but it's just a lot of like bass and muddiness. And I already have a bass line going in my track, so that's going to kind of interfere with the bass line. So I decided to take that out. So that's pretty much what this EQ is doing. Then we have a plugin from these guys, Overloud. This is basically just to brighten the vocal a little bit. It's not super important. This can be done with maybe saturation or some overdrive, but it kind of adds a little bit of crispiness to the vocal.
In this life is sin.
It's definitely making it louder as well, so it sounds a little better because it's louder, but it's really just adding a little bit
like
of highs.
the oral exciter from Waves.
Yeah, any kind of like exciter. This is exactly what that is. It's not really a saturator, but it's just trying to give a little bit more life to the vocal with frequencies. So I have this on it as well. This utility is not doing anything. So this is something I'll probably go in more depth in the actual course, but this is a rack that I made. And what this is called parallel processing. So think of this as a signal of the audio. So the vocal is going through this effect, then it's going through this effect, and then it reaches this audio effect rack and it gets split up into, I don't know, 10 different channels. So think of this as like a line. It goes like one there, one there, one there, one there. And the idea behind parallel processing is that you have your original signal, which is your dry one that has no effects on it. And then on all these different versions, you have different effects that all play at the same time. And you get this really kind of process developed sound. So I'll turn this off and play the vocal again.
All I need in this life is sin. Is a club addiction and a good best friend. Can we take these shots?
So if you listen carefully, you can definitely hear a bunch of things going on. The sound gets really wide. So if you look at the way this is set up, some of these layers are panned left and right. So you can see 2 to the right, 2 to the left, 13 to the left, 13 to the right. So that creates this really wide vocal, which is an effect that maybe you want for your track. There's a lot of delay, right? So we have these delays down here. There's a delay, there's another filter delay right here. And you can solo all these and listen to what they're doing. So this one's a little more subtle because the volume's quieter, but basically I'll go through this in the actual course and show you guys how to make one of these for yourself. But it's a really great quick tool to get a dry vocal kind of wet, as they say, process it and give it some reverb, some delay, some compression. It can really help it just sound a lot more polished in the mix.
Is
So I
the
use this a
primary
lot.
reason you have that as one sort of rack just so ease of reusing it, or
Yeah, pretty much. Like I can just drag this in, and I don't only use this for vocals. I use this on synths a lot if I need to get a synth like really kind of processed and big in the mix. But you can also achieve this with sends over here. You could set up a template and have all your different effects kind of here, and then you can send the vocal there. So I'm actually doing that a little bit with this reverb, but I like to kind of manage it all in one device. So like I processed this vocal, now I have another EQ because maybe I introduced some new bass here or some new frequencies, and I kind of want to shape the vocal to fit again over here. So I have that on. Then, this is something that I think a lot of people that are newer to producing, they fail to do, is that they fail to create movement in their sounds or change. So this is what we would call automation. So here's a plugin that I'm sure most of the producers that are teaching this course use, or some variation of it, but came out in the last couple of years. It's called Endless Smile. It's like 15 bucks. And it's just this one knob. And when you turn the knob, it adds a lot of reverb, delay, and filter to the sound. And it can really be great for buildups because it creates a lot of tension. So if we look here and we press A, oops, let me turn this off. We can see the automation for this lane right here. So let me close this. So as we get closer to this drop section right here, you can see that I'm automating this plugin to open up that knob more and more and more. And what you'll hear is that the vocal gets super washy and it creates a lot of tension, as I said before. So let's listen to that.
Lights come on, till the 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 lights come on,
So all that reverb that you're hearing that's building and those delays, that's all coming from this plugin. If I turn it off, right? So you don't have to do it with this plugin. You can do this. There's like some other ones that do something very similar, but it's a great way to kind of create movement on your vocal and not have it be so flat the entire time. So I'm using that for a build-up. One other plugin I'm going to talk about is a really great plugin called Soothe. And this is a mixing plugin. And what this does is think of it as an EQ. So an EQ is kind of static throughout time. You make some changes and this doesn't really change, you know, as your track plays. What this will do is it'll, as different parts of the vocal play, it'll detect areas where the vocal may sound a little bit harsh. So with vocals, usually there's like a sibilance or like an S kind of sound when someone says like, I don't know, Sally or something like that. There's that kind of sound that usually after all the processing gets pretty harsh and hurts your ears. And so what this will do is it'll kind of detect those frequencies on the fly and bring them down. It's also like another name for this is like a dynamic EQ, and it can be really great, especially with vocals, to help tame them down a bit. So if we go back here and like listen.
good best friend. Can we take these shots? Club a dick, all I need in this life is sin.
So in this life of sin, there's a lot of that kind of sound because sin has it. And you can kind of see if you look over here, right when he says life of sin, you'll see a big kind of duck because the plugin's detecting that and it's kind of carving out those frequencies as they happen in real time. So let's just watch that one more time.
All I need in this life is sin. Is a club.
If I take it off, you'll hear it's a little bit harsher. It's kind of subtle, but
All I need in this life is sin. Is a club addiction and a good.
So it kind of, you know, detects that on the fly and reduces it. So we got Soothe there. And then another thing we got is a widening plugin. So this is called the Haas effect. It's something I'll go into more. It doesn't always get used with vocals. You can use it with synths, but it's another audio effect rack to help widen up a sound. But yeah, that's pretty much, you know, there's a couple other things in here that these are more just filters that I use to change the sound over time. So less about processing, but that's kind of like the core processing. So again, if we listen to the vocal without all this,
Take these shots. All I need in this life is sin.
and then we listen to it with it.
All I need in this life is
It's a lot
sin.
edgier. It's a lot cooler. It kind of fits in the track better. And yeah, during the course, I'll be showing you guys more about how I do this and more tricks with vocals to kind of keep it interesting throughout a track and, you know, different automations you can do with it as well.
Yeah, and that's especially important because a lot of us are going to be, or a lot of new producers are recording their own voice, or not certainly not major label level like singers and songwriters. So the more techniques you have to make it sound better or to cut out bad frequencies, the ability to maybe also tighten up, being in key, but especially, if you're going to be talking into the mic, things like that, the stuff that's can juice up your own voice, give it movement. That's the kind of stuff that's going to make it go from sounding like very amateur to potentially really cool.
Yeah.
Don't forget that the major label people are using all this stuff too. They just, they're professional vocalists that also use the same techniques that we're going to go over. So it's not cheating. It's what it is.
Exactly. And yeah, thanks a lot, Tyler. Again, we're gonna get, I think pretty much all of us will get deeper into different techniques that we use, but some of those were very enlightening. Thank you, bro.
Yeah.
Alex, Detlef, we're gonna have go next. Another guy who's had big records on Repopulate Mars, including his #1 Swag On, and his #2 Music Please. So he's no stranger to Beatport success with the label, and he's very good at a lot of things, but he's good at making fresh original beats, and he's going to show us a little bit about kind of creating on the fly, how to keep it interesting, how to be creative. So I'm always excited to see your techniques. So let's check it out, Detlef.
So hi guys, yeah, it's good to be here. Like it's a really good class. I learned myself a lot of stuff. Especially, I have to admit that I've been compressing a lot lately. Lee. I promise I do.
This is
Just
an
a little,
ongoing debate, guys, and joke, because Detlef tells everyone not to compress, and Lee tells everyone to, and Lee does his own class.
But he's right. When you're pulling a sample that's compressed, don't compress it. Absolutely. Like you don't need to. Like don't over compress ever.
Yeah, but
Lately
I do.
Who are you and what have you done with Detlef?
I've been least. Now I'm like compressing all my bass lines and stuff. It's like,
well, that's funny because now I'm not compressing anything because I
no.
You.
So yeah, basically, guys, what we're gonna do is like in my class, we're gonna be like to the creative part of making music, making like beats and loops and stuff like that. So basically, like creativity is something that you can actually force, and you can actually be creative even if you are not feeling creative at the moment. So what we're gonna do, most of the classes we start like from scratch, doing like beats and stuff like that, and then like taking those beats and getting to another level, making them sound more like full, sounding like more professional, let's say. But it's actually really easy to do stuff. Like the way I'm gonna show you is gonna take you from the place where you're stuck in a loop and you're like, oh, what can I do next? So basically, I'm gonna teach you a few tricks on how you can actually go to the next level. So on this course, like I'm gonna show you, I just did a beat over here. I usually do all my stuff on this page, and I usually do it with samples. The reason I do that is I think you can actually manipulate the loops, the sounds much easier, and you can see as well that way. So, the optical, and then you have the sound as well. It's easier for you to do stuff. So basically, I have done this simple loop over here, and I'm going to show you 2 or 3 little tricks on how you can actually make this simple beat, how you can actually create something that you can move actually forward and give you more ideas on how you can actually put more stuff into the song and sound more full and sound like a proper song. So what I did is like I have 3-4 loops over here. I'm not gonna even listen to them. So that's how we do it. So basically, I'm gonna just drop stuff over here like this. Oh no, that's a MIDI channel. Let me move this thing over here. Okay. So let's take this one as well. So now we have, like, as you can see, 3 different loops over here. So what I'm gonna do is like, by eye, I'm gonna just keep this part over here, and this part, and then keep this part, and I'm gonna keep this part, and this part. Perfect. So
love this. I fucking love this.
So basically now we have done like a loop, which is going to sound amazing. I'm really sure about it. So now, instead of having that simple beat we had before, now we have this.
Every time.
So
Tech house magician.
so listen, now it doesn't sound like completely good. You have to do like, levels and stuff like that. Something sounds like louder and whatever. But what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take this down a bit like this so I can keep them in the background. And then it's like, okay, you did like a loop over here. What I don't really like is that part over here, because that part it has like a sound color, which is probably gonna mess with the thing I'm gonna show you next. So I don't really wanna keep this active for now. So I'm just gonna mute it for a bit. So now we have like a loop going on, it's fine. It's nice and easy. We are done with the loop. And you want to move to the next part, so.
Alex, really quick, I just wanted to tell people that may not know what you just did. If you select something and hit 0 instead of delete, it'll keep the audio there but mute it. So it's if you don't know that trick, it's super important if you may want to use it later.
Yeah, there are some automations like I'm going to explain on the class as well. But yeah, there are some numbers and some buttons you hit and makes your life so much easier. So yeah, I just, on that part that I selected, I just pressed 0 and, it just mutes. It's over there if I want to use it. But if I don't, it just press 0 and it mutes, so it's fine. So now what I did, I was like, okay, I did my loop. What can I do now? So most of the people are struggling like on creating something, creating like ideas or whatever. So I just use the simpler. I just use the slice button over here, and I threw in there just the two of us, which is a really good song. And I just moved. I'm gonna show you like the part I didn't use it yet. We're gonna use it like together now. So basically, if you press, or let me move these things. So basically, if you press this thing over here, you can actually play with your computer's keyboard. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna jump for a while. So I'm gonna do like. So I did like something extremely stupid. It sounded extremely stupid, but now I'm gonna just zoom in. I have a delay as well, so I'm really sorry for my bad playing. So now that I did this, I'm gonna just go there and start playing. Okay, so I'm gonna keep this part over here, which is not great at the moment, but I'm gonna keep it anyway. So we have this part. What you can do with this part, you can actually go and just use like an effect, like a EQ3, and just, let me move this. I have a small screen on my computer and makes things so difficult. So I'm gonna
Sizes and everything, buddy, or so they say. I guess I wouldn't know.
I wasn't referring to that, but anyway.
There you go.
So now we have like this kind of baseline playing over there, which if we don't want to use as a baseline, I'm going to show you like the potentials are endless because we have this thing going on, but it can easily change to something different by simply moving that stuff over here. So if I let me find a good spot over here. So now you have like a kind of a melody going on in there, and you can move on and just do the bass line, or you can actually use like a second channel over here by just, you know, removing all these frequencies. I don't know if you can actually hear that from your speakers or headphones, but it's actually really good bass line. And then there are different ways to spice up your, and that's why I use this part of you know, Ableton, because there are different ways to spice up your loop and whatever you're building, because I can just go on that one over here. Let's say I have this part and I'm going to just take it like this. Or you can even do like tricks like that, like take a small part and just throw it over there, and then you can start like being super creative. But that way, being from that page, you can actually do all these automations that you can actually manipulate all the audio and all the sound like so nice and so easy. And you can, you know, be creative, because you can see where there are gaps between like the bass lines and this and that, and you can fill it with elements and do stuff. Like the potentials are endless, and there are many more tricks that you can actually boost your creativity and do stuff that can actually lead you to making something unique and special. So
Nice.
yeah.
Oh, that was awesome, Alex.
Pretty amazing.
One of my
Thank you.
favorite gets of you just sort of working on the fly. And I think, you know, it's funny because when you're just playing in the snippets until you quantize them, it sounds like nonsense. And all of a sudden,
Yeah, I
you know,
know.
it's so random, but it sounds so good. And then you can move it up and down that song and to change the context, keep the same notes, and you have a completely different section of your song. So that's a really awesome technique. And like I said, guys,
Thank you.
Alex really gets into some great and very different techniques during the class. So it's awesome to have an opportunity to see all these different styles and ways to come at and skin a cat, so to speak. Because obviously, as Alex said, not every day are we feeling creative, but there's always boxes you can put yourself in. You know, there's a sign. Part of the point of the class is that we have assignments every day. You know, you have songs that you're making for the week. So sometimes structure, or, you know, if you're not feeling super creative, sometimes these techniques or having an assignment, something that you're working or putting yourself in a box or trying, can help you make some of the most creative stuff instead of having every option in the world. So awesome. That was great, Detlef. So we also have Steven Deeper Purpose here today. He also had a #1 track this last year, although it wasn't on Repopulate Mars, but it was one of my favorite tracks. It's a remix that he actually sent to me very early on for feedback, and I played every set for at least 10 months. So he's got a lot of wonderful techniques and some very unique ways to approach breakdowns, vocal processing, songwriting. So why don't we jump into it? Deeper Purpose.
Hey guys, so I'm actually going to run through some breakdown stuff, some transition stuff on the track that Lee just mentioned, my Everybody's Free remix. So sort of when I tackle tracks, sort of there's no right or wrong way to make a track, but I tend to start with my breakdowns. It's a bit backwards to a lot of way that people work, but for me, it just tends to work. So as I say, like, you always end up finding techniques that work for yourself and sort of get your groove and your flow going. And it's literally probably 90% of the time is where I start with my track. I'll have, say, a break idea, a melody idea, like a synth, or just a big moment. So most of my tracks tend to have like big moments in the builds and the breakdowns. So that's where I start out. So I'm going to run you through the sort of the breakdown quickly on my Everybody's Free remix. Obviously, this was a bit different to creating an original track. So I picked out sort of the key parts from the remix stems that I got sent through. And and it sort of allowed me then to build up my moment, the big moment obviously in the breakdown. I'm just going to play you through a little bit of it here and then walk you through sort of what happens and sort of some of the transitional parts, and a few little tricks. So I'm just going to go for it now quick. Ooh, 2 seconds, guys. Let's change the audio. Zoom. So, I mean, as you guys can hear, there's sort of like 2 different separate builds in this that happens. Obviously, like a lot of tracks these days, sort of like they just like massive snare rolls and massive builds. So I always tend to try and think outside the box in the way that I'm doing my builds. And so in this track, it sort of builds up once with the piano, has a sort of a real moment, and then drops out again. And you slowly then have to transition back into the actual track. I tried various ways of doing this, and what I sort of found was that it works better to sort of have a moment, and then have a break again, and then build the crowd again to go again. Which when you have the bass sort of starts to filter in here, when obviously everything echoes off, and slowly you start to get the bass line coming through, and like automating sort of the EQ. So you can see on the EQ on the bass sort of like starts to bring the bass in down here on the bottom right.
I thought this was a really genius technique too, of you being able to go, because you were a little bit outside of your normal style on
Yes.
what you were brought here, and you're able to get back, because a lot of what Deeper Purpose does, his bass lines are kind of leading the melody in a lot of your songs. You know, it's not super subby bass lines. There's a lot of low mids. That's a lot of the time it's driving your melody. So it's like that wouldn't always work with big chords over or under it. So you've been able to separate it into sections and have the second build that gives you the drop. Whereas if you just done the chords straight into the drop, it probably never would have worked. And instead have these 2 huge moments and these 2 huge payoffs.
Exactly, and that's the sort of a key thing that you need to think about, is obviously like transitions and sort of making a track sort of work together. It's all well and good, say, having a massive break, and sort of like all these big sounds and big moments, but if it doesn't actually glue together with your main track, then you're going to have sort of issues, and you'll have sort of like you can have like end up having 2 good parts, but they don't actually work together. So like transitionings and sort of like breaking down your build, like breaking down again that build up, sort of echoing it out, and then allowing sort of the actual main track to come through, is sort of what took me a while to play around on this, and actually getting a bass line that actually works as well with the sort of the melody from the piano. Sort of another sort of technique I used in the middle of this breakdown as well, and I've started using a lot of tracks, is sort of adding sort of a re-sub bass in sort of underneath. So on this, I've got this sort of re-sub bass which I've layered with the root note of the piano melody that plays. So you can hear that there. You may not hear it if you're on some headphones, but you can sort of hear that layers with the piano build. So initially, sort of, you don't want to give everything away sort of like straight away in your breakdowns. Sort of the same sort of applies to your whole track. Sort of you want to break it up and obviously keep the listener interested and have new parts which sort of filter through, which maybe don't appear in the rest of your track. So this re-space, for example, only appears in this breakdown. It appears nowhere else in the track, and there's sort of like atmosphere synths on the build which only appear in sort of this section of the track, and it's very sort of fundamental in the way that I make my music and a lot of tracks, that you have these new elements which appear, which sort of keep the listener interested throughout the track. Because you obviously don't want these elements sort of happening too much. So I'll sort of play the piano here to begin with, and then you can hear the respace sort of comes in and layers up with it. So when you sort of do these respaces, you haven't got to go for the full melody. So sort of you can see the pattern here. It only follows sort of the main root of the main note, which appears obviously in that on the piano melody. So it's not actually doing the full pattern. So you have sort of two different melodies sort of laid on top of each other, just following the root note from the piano, and it sort of creates a really good like sort of textural atmosphere, especially like, so in a club you sort of feel the respace sort of come through. It's a very little cool technique that I've started doing on some of my breakdowns.
Well, also, I'll point out that, you know, those extended notes make it feel more emotional. Whereas if you had the sort of stabby notes that are in the main, you know, it doesn't give the same emotional effect, because it's generally in these breakdowns, you're trying to build tension, you're trying to build emotion. And what these Reese notes do, the extended notes that follow the root, is they kind of like reinforce a, like it gives your groin and your heart that same feeling. But then it allows you to then have the complete change back to your groovier, stabbier notes. Whereas if you just had stabby short notes, but with a sub, it wouldn't really have given the emotional effect that you've given there, which is like this huge uplifting moment that reinforces the emotion of the piano.
Yes, exactly that. So it's like when you break down sort of layering up all these different, obviously, tracks, it allows you to create that emotion, like they said, but the extended notes, obviously if they were just sort of stabby ones, it sort of doesn't have the same effect. And so another thing I just wanted to touch on quickly is a little transition trick that I use in this track, and I use it on sim, so I use it on vocals. So I'll play it here on its solo, so you guys can hear what happens. And it's sort of like it creates a flicker effect with the vocal. I also use it on synths, so I've used it here to sort of transition into my breakdown. So the way I do this, it's a very little cool trick that I use it on most transitions now, and it sort of breaks up sort of a regular synth. So if I just play a synth on its own, it's quite boring. It's just like a standard like one note. So just to make that a bit more interesting, I use a compressor and use an automation on the output gain. You can see here, so it sort of like creates a flicker effect on the output gain, and it happens. So what I do, I tend to do, draw this in just a little bit of time, copy it across, and then obviously as it progresses, I make obviously the gaps in between this a bit longer. And then I go to my dry wet, and so over time it goes from the dry signal. So if you guys don't know what dry signal is, the dry signal is obviously unprocessed sound, and then over time it then moves across to the wet signal. So your wet signal is obviously your full, like the effect. So that's a little transition effect that I tend to use on sort of vocals and synths, just to make them sound a little bit different. And the same's happening here on this vocal down on the bottom. It's the compressor. This happens for a longer period of time down here and increases as we go on. 2 seconds, just trying to think what else I can run through in the breakdowns. I think that was mostly it that I wanted to cover in this lesson, but obviously I'll go into a bit more in depth of how I do like my breakdown stuff. So like only you guys know my tracks, like Elevate, like how I time manipulation, how I speed things up, slow things down. There's a lot of other like transitional effects that I use, which are not actually in this song, but I've got a lot of different cool ways that I use transitions and sort of like breaking down sort of into tracks, which say like the system, which came out of Repopulate Mars, like taking a track from like a big, like massive subby bass line driving, then it breaks down into sort of like silence, and then just like creating big moments really in tracks, which I'll talk through in the course a lot more, especially like going into how I make my bass lines. Like these said, they're like a real like key part of my track. They tend to like be the backbone. They really carry the track on its own without having to add in too many more percussive elements, etc. So yeah, I'll go into more stuff like that on the course.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. That was great. And I just
No
want to
stress.
point out that, you know, what he was showing you at the end, that gating, like stuff like that, if you can do it with the elements either in the track instead of slapping in white noise, snare rolls that aren't a part of the rest of the track, the more stuff you can do, the more transitions you can do that you're creating out of elements of the track, whether you're reversing thing, you know, a lot of guys are going to show you different ways to do this. The more your track sounds natural, is in key, sounds glued together, it doesn't sound like crazy dissonant. I'm not saying never use a crash, never, but I mean, this is stuff like this. That's kind of what gives it that cool cutting edge feel at the same time that's got this big classic piano. So awesome. Thanks for taking that through that, Stephen. And Lee, you are one of my oldest friends. You're last, certainly not least. Lee Curtis. He actually was just recently, he's been put in consideration for a Grammy for the Soul Clap, mixing the Soul Clap album, which sounds
Produced,
great.
I produced and wrote and mixed it with. I worked with the group. Very proud of it. Very interesting album, and it's a very nice surprise to be considered for. Yeah, we got we're in consideration for best dance album and single, and you know, that's did not expect that. We literally made it out of most of that album out of my little studio. We worked out a couple other ones too, but yeah, it was great. I was really happy.
So another guy in this class doing more with less. No.
Exactly. No, really, it's we're going to teach you how to get incredible sound out of sometimes just your laptop, some plugins, maybe even just Ableton. I mean, I was shocked to see that John Summit's using Operator to get most of his bass lines, and they sound incredible. So, and you know, going back in time, a lot of the early music that got Lee and I started was made out of mainly Ableton. We didn't have a lot of other stuff. So, yeah, it definitely can be done. I kind of am the resident engineer guy. I go into a lot of that stuff with you guys and kind of break down the nuts and bolts. So when you have good ideas, we can get them sounding good, because we all know that you can have the best song and the best idea and best thing you've ever written. And if the engineering's not good, nobody's going to play it. Record labels aren't going to sign it. And, you know, your friends will listen to it and go, oh, it's a cool idea, but we want to get it sounding good enough to the point where people want to hear it again and again, and DJs want to play it, labels want to sign it. So
yeah, and an A&R or the label head, if they get a song and it's not smacking and they don't start playing it, they're going to forget about it.
yeah, and Lee and I both own labels for over a decade, and it really has changed a lot. So the reason I really try to go deep into the engineering side of things is simply because you will get passed over if the track isn't slapping. So if the sonics aren't fitting, if the frequencies aren't represented, it kind of doesn't matter how good the track is, because and the closest you might get is a label may say, hey, we like the song, we're going to need you to pay for an engineer to mix it and then submit it to us. So, which is very rare, because doing A&R as long as Lee and I have, we know that we're probably just going to kind of keep going to somebody that's already done that. So we want to try to help you guys do that before you submit. So let me share my screen and hopefully, okay, so Lee, you have to make me
Oh,
host.
crap. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
And to add to what he was saying, you know, even guys from previous courses, you know, as we get down to the end, they'll be asking, you know, because they know that sometimes even John Summit, even the best of us will get stem mixes, and they say, well, you know, I'm not gonna worry about that. I'll just get a stem mix and master. And no, you need to make these songs the best you can possibly sound, and to your ear, to your taste, because that's what's going to make your sound you. And ultimately, even if you decided to get an engineer to mix things later, if you don't have it sounding the way you want, they're not going to know what sounds right to you. So it's super important I mean, it's something that it took me years to even be interested in doing, but mixing, compression, all these engineering elements, getting it right, as close to right first are super, super important. So when someone goes to master, someone goes to mix and master, you've got, you know, what you think is a perfect product, and then they take it that extra 10%.
Yeah, and I think Lee, you were just saying you're number one. Congrats to you guys for that on Beatport too. That you and Joshua did like 17 versions getting your mix right before you sent it over to have somebody do a stems mix, correct?
Well, there were definitely 17 versions.
Okay, but my point,
Not exactly, but
my
there were
point,
definitely 17 versions.
my point being is that
We got there in the end.
even when we have somebody like a mega pro mix some stuff for us, because we're really excited about it and we know it has that level of potential, we do still spend the time. So even people that have engineers do the final mix, we're still putting in the time, and it's really important that you get everything balanced and sounding the way that you want it, and you don't make the engineer kind of fill in creatively. You want it to sound the way that you want it to sound. So he or she just kind of aces it out, levels it, and gets it really, really gelled together and popping. So without further ado, I've got a little one I'm working on here. It's pretty basic, but I just wanted to go through the process of, okay, we've got our ideas, we've got a beat, we've got a bass line here. What are my next steps, or what have I done to kind of start gluing things together and getting things to knock? So simple beat. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What do we got here? What's going on there?
You might want to turn your camera off too, but
we can try that, but usually it works. There we go. I'm just gonna basically go through what I'm doing with the drums and the bass today. Okay, sorry, I didn't realize it was gonna freeze it because it was gonna start slowing down the computer. It was doing fine. Okay, so while this is freezing, I'll let you know, like, the first thing that I would do is, like, we're gonna get a groove going, like Alex showed you. We have something that we're happy with. We have elements that are moving, things are starting to syncopate. The first thing I would do is kind of go through and see what frequencies are sticking out, what's poking through. And it's really important. I know not everybody has a nice set of monitors, but as you progress, just remember that, like, working on headphones is incredibly difficult to get a good mix out of. And I know Summit and I use these JBL, I can't remember the model, but they make several different ones and they're very affordable. I also have another pair of Genelecs that I really like. But these JBLs are pretty cheap, so I'm not sponsored by them, but they're friggin' amazing. One of my pro engineer friends recommended them and brought them over for me to try it. I'm like, these are incredible B monitors. They sound really, really good and they have good bass response. I'm not gonna try to make you spend money on equipment this whole course, but it's really important that you have good monitors because those are your ears. So without being able to tell what you're doing, or having monitors that don't give you a decent reference, you'll have a tough time getting your mixes to gel, to work, you know. And when you go play them, like when you've mixed it on your monitors and it sounds great in your room, and then you go take it in your car and it sounds like absolute garbage, it's a pretty horrible feeling. I went through that for years when I first started out. You know, I had a lot of different monitors, cheapest of the cheap. And it was terrible. It's a rough feeling. It's like you get something you're super happy with, and then you go play it for somebody, and it sounds terrible. So it's just like a simple loop I'm working on, but we'll go to first just the drums here. Got a little more busy loop here. And I've just started the mixing process on this a little bit. I'm not going to get too deep into it until I flesh out more ideas, but I thought the beat was nice, so we can work from here. On the kick drum, we'll solo that. I recorded this off of one of my machines and didn't label it, but sounds like a 909 or 808.
It's a 909.
It's a 909, isn't it? I don't have a 909, so I lied. It's off of the Rolling Cloud stuff, which is also really great. If you guys are looking for classic Roland sounds, the Rolling Cloud, I use it a lot. I've already recorded this one in as audio. So I'm just going through the kick, and I see here with the, I'll play it without the EQ or the compressor on. It doesn't sound too bad. I feel like it's got a little bit too much, just a little bit too much in this low mid right here. It's got a lot of snap on it as well. So the first thing I would do is throw an EQ on it. And this is the Fab Filter Pro Q3, really incredible EQ, probably one of the best ones on the market. But as I go through this track a little bit, and I'm going to be kind of quick today because we go really in depth with this stuff, and I think I might even go on too long in the class. And I'm very happy to answer questions. And when we're doing the course, you can email me or in the chats. Very happy to answer anything that I possibly can. But you can absolutely use the EQ8 that comes with Ableton. These are very similar EQs. One of them's just got a little more bells and whistles than the other. So if I wanted to do the same thing here, see I'm cutting off the low end around 35 hertz. The reason I'm doing that is because most audio is inaudible below, I don't know what it is, like 30 hertz. And you still get rumble. So it's a dangerous thing with dance music because we're one of the few genres, along with like hip hop and trap and stuff. Electronic music is really, really heavily reliant on the sub bass. I know I've definitely mixed songs where I'll go play it at a club and I'm like, everything sounds great. There is no bottom end. Like, what did I do with the bottom end? So you have to go back to the studio and you realize, oh, I cut too much. So with the 909 kick, we know we want to leave some sub bass, but everything below, you know, like basically this point here at 73, I'm going to start rolling it off. And as I get into mixing a little bit further, I might be scooching this up to 40, maybe even a little bit more. Basically, I'm giving a low cut on the kick to get rid of rumble, you know, which is basically low frequencies that we're not using and that are completely inaudible because low frequencies that start mashing that are inaudible will create mud. Mud is when frequencies are canceling out, when the mix doesn't sound right. It sounds like there's phasing. If we start EQing some of this stuff out that we don't need, we're automatically eliminating that being an issue later. So that's why I kind of start sculpting from the get-go, because when I put in my bass line, I want it to start fitting and gelling. So the first thing, we've got the EQ here. And you see I've done similar thing with the EQ8. And it's got a little bit too much snap, so I might go in here and get rid of just a little bit of the high frequency. This particular song, I'm also using a top for a kick. This is a really good way to be able to kind of design your own kicks. If one of them has the low end you're looking for, but isn't hitting the top end, sometimes I'll layer like a Lindrum kick and cut out all the low end because those have really cool top end. And then layer the low end with an 808 or a 909. This one, probably shorten the transients here, just like I think West End showed earlier. Just to reiterate, this trick is a total lifesaver. On beats, transients, make sure this is going forward, and then you can reduce this number and it'll shorten the transient, thus making the sound tighter and smaller. I've also got a sub here. And just quickly showing you what a sidechain compressor does, because we're going to go into compression and EQing. So also I forgot to turn the compressor on here. I highly, highly recommend the 2A compressor as just like a Swiss Army compressor for anybody that's looking to buy plugins. The glue compressor in Ableton is basically, it does a lot of the same job that this one does. This happens to be the Waves CLA2A. UAD makes them. I think Plugin Alliance makes them. Almost every plugin company has somebody, every plugin company has a 2A style compressor. And you see this is just kind of tightening this up. And then on this sub, the sub had a little bit too much attack. So I've put just the standard Ableton compressor. I actually really like it. And I'm going to show you how to set up a side chain quickly. So with this arrow that's next to compressor right here, if you open it, it'll open your side chain options. And what I did is you go and make another channel, an audio channel. I've clicked on up here and I call it phantom kick, trigger kick. It's all the same thing. People call it different things. Then you want to copy your actual kick. So your sub kick, and you put it up here. So that's what I've done already. You know, this is the same kick. And then I pull it out through the entire track. When you do a when you do a side chain kick, it's important that you let it run through the whole track, because if it stops for a moment and you've got a bass line that goes while the kick stops, that side chain will stop and it'll make the bass push all the way forward in the speakers. Or if it's whatever you're side chaining, a synth line, a melodic synth line, when that side chain stops, you're going to have a completely different sound. So make sure that you run your side chain kick all the way through your track. But yeah, I wanted to side chain this a little bit to the main kick. So when it hits, the kick carries through, because the side chain is going to duck the transients with the attack and the release. So I've got a fairly slow attack. So the attack is how quickly it hits and the release is for how long it hits. So as that kick, the trigger comes through the side chain, it's going to duck the signal for as long as you specify with the attack and the release. And this threshold right here is the amount that it will duck. So now the sub is kind of, and this was hitting on an off beat, but the actual kick drum is kind of long. So I wanted to make sure that it was out of the way. And then here I have some 606 hats that I did, a little percussion loop, clap. Okay, so that's kind of the quick EQ and compression. Basically going to start getting rid of frequencies that are in the way. And then as far as compression is concerned, I'm looking for just a couple of dBs of compression out of the kick. And some of these other channels, like Alex and I have went over before, this sample right here, this tambourine kind of percussive loop, is from some old samples that I have. This is definitely, if you look at it, this has been compressed. So be very careful to not add compression to things that that are already compressed unless it's something you feel is completely necessary. And these samples I made out of Contact, the snaps, and this clap. I had compression on them in Contact, so I'm not going to over compress these things. I want the transients to remain. And I was going to go through how I compressed the bass line, but I had to freeze it. But suffice to say, the most important thing I wanted to show you guys that you can see everybody in this tutorial so far has done is grouping or busing. It's the same thing. In Ableton, it's called group, but a lot of engineers will call it busing. A lot of producers call it busing. It's exactly the same thing. So you can see here, I've got something that's labeled DRM bus, okay? That's my drum bus. My drum bus is all of the drums I'm using here. And you can see them, I've highlighted them. The way to create a bus or a group is to highlight everything, and you can either Command G or right click and G. And you see what this will do, this will put everything in a group. And by doing that, we now have a way to manipulate the volume of all of these things. So like once we get the so we're able to manipulate the total volume of all the drums. And you know, just a little like bonus tip, you'll hear this a lot in house music. I just slapped a filter on the drum bus. There you go. So that like now we're able to apply not just engineering effects, compression, EQ, harmonics, parallel compression, all these things that I'll get into in the class. We can also do some cool tricks. You can put a reverb, a delay, filters, like it's really endless. And it's a cool way to go into transitions or out of transitions. So that's another little side advantage of drum bus or busing in general, because you can do it with your synths, you can do it with vocals. So I tend to start collecting things in buses once I get things moving and I kind of know where everything's going to be. So get the drums in a bus. Number one, you gotta put your drums in a bus. A lot of people will ask me, do I put my kick in the bus or do I put it outside the bus? Again, all of these things I'm going to teach you guys. It's still completely about feel. So if you have your kick in the bus and it sounds fantastic when it's in there, great. If you want to, if it's not popping, if it sounds like the kick needs its own character, move the kick outside the bus. Does it sound better? That is it. Like that's engineering right there. Does it sound better? Don't do something just because this is how other people do it, or that's what one of the instructors said in the video. Try it. If it sounds better outside the bus, go for it. Some people have it in the bus. Some people have it outside of the bus. Trust your instincts in your ears first. So I'm just going to play the drums soloed. I personally always put a little EQing on the bus just in case I have frequencies that are kind of sticking out or not really being represented when I go towards the mixing process. Not using it right now, but you can see with this fab filter, if you hold the mouse down here, it'll show you exactly where your frequencies are coming through. So like we have a peak at 117, we have a peak at 7.700. So next is some bus compression. I use a lot of different compressors for this. I'm just going with the 2A because it sounds good here, but we're gonna play it without the bus compression and then with. That's without. This is just with a little bit of compression. I mean, you see the meter's not even ticking right here. We don't even have a dB of compression. So it can be very, very gentle. In the case of this track, I would probably use very slight bus compression because I don't need that much. But overall, and this is what I'm going to quickly, lastly, go toward how we can accomplish the same thing with Ableton plugins, because I know not everybody has a plethora of plugins to choose from, and that's completely fine. But you can see that just a little bit of reduction starts to glue the drums together. And that's why they call this thing the glue compressor. So I'm going to shut off the EQ and compressor that I'm using. And I've chosen, I haven't done this yet, I've just thrown these on here before we started. We're going to see if we can get a similar gluing and compressed effect for the drum bus with the Ableton plugins. So we'll start with the multi-band compression. And again, we want to keep it really slight because most of these things have been slightly compressed or compressed on the way in. And compression is multiplicit, not additive. So what I'm saying is that if you have 3 dB of reduction in your kick, and then it's going through 2 dB, it's not 5 dB, it's 6. If you have 4 dB of reduction on your kick, and then it's going through another compressor of 4, it's actually 16 and not 8. So you have to be very careful not to over compress and start losing transients, but at the same time, the right amount of compression will get everything to fit and start sounding really professional, and everything, all the frequency will be represented. Okay, so this is without the multi-dynamics, with the multi-dynamics. So we don't need quite the high end, the mids. When we looked at our EQ, we're missing a little bit in this range from about here to here. So 275 to 3000. So keeping that in mind, we don't need to push on the input here. We don't need to push the low or the highs. And I'm using very slight movements here. You know, you don't have to get crazy with it when you get down to the mixing side of things. And then I'm going to turn on the glue compressor. I want kind of a slower attack, middle release. Ratio 2 should be enough. We don't need to compress it 4. Start moving the threshold down until you see some movement on the meter and a little bit of makeup. And we'll just A/B this real quick. This is without these. And here's with the Ableton plugins. It just sounds a little bit more cohesive. So I go much further in depth during the course with this, but hopefully that was beneficial and there's some good information for you guys to apply.
So I noticed you had one group with only 2 channels. Is that because you were used to a short bus? Just kidding. All right, well, guys, this ran a lot longer than I thought. So we're gonna have to wrap up. But I know you guys were asking a few questions in the chat as it was going. Obviously, we got a little bit of a late start, and this is run about a bit longer than I expected. So I do have an appointment to get to, but I just want to reiterate that I think this class is amazing. As you notice, the guys stuck around to listen to each other because there's a ton of great information. Every time Detlef comes on, you know, every time anyone teaches, I learn a lot, and I know that's true for everyone else. So we're all constantly learning from each other. And yeah, if you have the time and the wherewithal to join the course, I'll just post the link one more time, but we'd love to have you. I know we've got nothing. Okay. We've had nothing but good reviews and people, you know, the next Repopulate Mars coming out, Havoc and Lawn and Perupa was made directly from techniques from the class, including some of Deeper Purposes. That's out November 16th. Got a bunch of, actually got an SOS VA coming of songs I've signed just from the class itself. So there's plenty of opportunity to, you know, give us great demos at the end of the course and to learn a ton of material. So again, I want to thank Joshua Dutloff and Lee Curtis for sticking around. Obviously, deeper purpose and West End just had to bounce, but I think everyone would just agree that we appreciate you joining us today, and hopefully we'll see some of you do the course. And if not, I hope what you found was interesting, vital, and you can rewatch it on our YouTube. So thanks again. Appreciate
Thanks,
you
guys.
today. And keep repopulating Mars. Either way. Peace.
Bye.
Peace, guys. Thank you.
Guys, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, guys. And you can watch this back on YouTube.
Thanks, Lee.